Howard Lutnick and Jameson Greer have suggested that they might be moving towards getting a good deal in Asia, and there are a number of candidates for that.
People have to speak up, that they would go to like $800 billion to cut in Medicaid is practically sinful.
This individual testified saying something that was contrary to what the president believes and the goals of this administration in regards to FEMA policy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Happy Friday. Tonight on America Decides, migration escalation. The White House says it is looking into suspending habeas corpus to deal with migrants. That's the right to challenge a person's detention in court. Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Stephen Miller had this to say.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not.
80%. That's what President Trump says he thinks, quote, seems right as a tariff rate between the United States and China. Right now, as you might remember, the levies are 145% on Chinese imports, which basically constitutes a trade embargo. 80% might as well. That's all to be explored. Where? Well, U.S. officials are preparing to meet with Beijing's negotiators this weekend in Europe. Judge Deneen, Fox News host Jeanine Pirro will serve as the top prosecutor here in the nation's capital, at least for now. She replaces interim U.S. Attorney Ed Martin, whose nomination was pulled because of Senate Republican opposition. Pelosi's perspective. House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi joins us to discuss the first American Pope and a lot more. What impact she thinks the Chicago-born pontiff will have on politics here at home. I want to start tonight, with Nicole Killian at the White House, Kelly O'Grady in New York. Nicole, at the briefing today, you brought up what we are hearing from the president, that he might be open in these negotiations with Republicans on Capitol Hill about the tax bill to have a higher tax rate applied to the wealthiest Americans. And you had an exchange with the press secretary about that. Tell us what you learned.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, well, obviously, we kind of want to get at what many lawmakers on Capitol Hill want to get at as they try to finalize the president's big, beautiful bill, if you will, is where he comes down on this issue of potentially increasing taxes. Obviously, it's not a politically popular point, certainly with Republicans, but something that privately the president has apparently nudged Republican leaders on as they try to craft this bill, perhaps raising the tax rate for that upper bracket of top earners. Take a listen to the exchange I had with the press secretary on that. What is it that he wants? Does he want them to increase the tax rates?
The president wants tax cuts, the largest tax cuts in history. He wants to extend his historic tax cuts from 2017, and he wants to see all of the other tax priorities that I just laid out for you included in this bill as well. As for the policy proposal you're talking about, the president has said he himself personally would not mind paying a little bit more to help the poor and the middle class and the working class in this country.
So certainly an interesting position there. I mean, this kind of comes on the heels of the president posting on Truth Social this morning that tiny tax, if you will, on the rich may be something that Republicans shouldn't do, but he's okay if they do it, is what the president said in that Truth Social post earlier today. So, again, we were just trying to see clarity around that post because, again, many Republican leaders on Capitol Hill have made clear that, yes, they want to extend the president's tax cuts, but they certainly don't want to increase taxes on individuals, even potentially the wealthy. That is something that Leader Thune reinforced in an interview earlier today. That being said, we did hear from the press secretary also kind of reiterating the president's support for things that he campaigned on in terms of no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime. So really wanting to aim some of those proposals at the middle class as well.
And Nicole, as you well know, during the Senate consideration of the budget framework, Elizabeth Warren put many amendments on the floor seeking a higher tax rate on very particular high-end tax earners, and Republicans voted against every single one of them. So very recently, they had votes in front of them, and they voted no. Doesn't sound like Senate Republicans, at least, based on that performance, will entertain this.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's why I say, Leader Thune kind of reiterated that again, that he is opposed to the idea of potentially raising taxes, even on the wealthy. I would note, too, that just today you had the House Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith here at the White House as well, speaking with the president as, again, they try to hammer out the tax portion of this bill. And we're still waiting to see if and when the committee will mark up that portion. We were expecting that may happen as soon as next week. That's at least according to GOP leadership, but still nothing has been put on the books as of yet.
Kelly O'Grady, I promise I have not forgotten about you. I never could. I'm so glad you're there. There's a lot of will they or won't they on the trade negotiating front that may or may not be the most important bit of economic news this week. It's Friday. What are you paying most attention to? What caught most your eye this week?
Well, it was really this potential 80%. And I think especially going into the weekend, I'm very curious to see what happens with these negotiations, if there is going to be any step back, because there's been a lot of momentum, it seems. Investor sentiment seems excited about the UK trade deal yesterday, the possibility of trade negotiations bringing something to the table with China. But Major, if you think about it, an 80% tariff, let's say I buy $1,000 worth of goods from China. That means I'm still going to be paying $800 on top of that to bring into the country. That's something that if you're my customer, Major, I'm likely going to be passing on to you. It's still very significant. And I was reading this study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and they estimated what a 60% tariff, so less than 80% tariff, and a 10% tariff on the rest of the world, which that does sound like is the baseline now, according to the president. They estimated that's going to raise inflation by 2 percentage points. So if the CPI right now is 2.4%, that would mean 4.4%. So kind of all of those things, I mean, is saying to me we're still going to have higher prices, even if we do get some trade deals.
And Kelly, what has been the effect so far at ports and even for those who are in the trucking business taking things from ports to market?
Well, imports from China have gone down significantly. I was looking at data from April 21st to April 28th, and we saw a 43% decrease from imports coming to the country. We're also seeing a decrease on exports, though, Major, and that is partially due to the retaliation from China against U.S. businesses and industries. So that's something very important to watch.
Nicole Killian and Kelly O'Grady, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Pope Leo XIV spent his first full day on the job presiding over Friday Mass at the Sistine Chapel. He addressed the cardinals in attendance briefly in his native English. On Sunday, Pope Leo XIV will lead a prayer from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. California Democratic Congresswoman and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi joins me now. Speaker Emerita, always great to see you. Your reaction yesterday when you heard what struck many as surprising news. Pope Leo XIV, based in Chicago, a kind of American but also Pan-American Pope, spent a lot of time in Peru. Your overall reaction?
Excitement, joy, love, gratitude. So happy that a Pope was chosen quite quickly, showing the unity of the conclave to choose this Pope. Yes, he's an American, but he's also global, having spent so much time in Peru, as well as spending time in the Vatican. And so he brings a global perspective to it all. But I was most excited when I heard his name, Leo XIV, Pope Leo XIV. Pope Leo XIII is one of my favorite popes. He was from at the turn of the century, the 1800s into 1903. And Pope Leo XIII wrote an encyclical called Rerum Novarum, of new things. And he wrote about workers' rights. He worked about the rights of workers to unionize, to have fair wages and working conditions. He talked about the poor and ministering to their needs. So when he chose a pope that hasn't been pope for like 125 years, when he chose his name, I thought he would be choosing his path of justice and peace.
Do you think, Madam Speaker Emerita, that this selection will have a particular and important political resonance in our country, considering the tenor of the conversation about the issues you just addressed and also migration with the Trump administration?
Well, I certainly hope so. worship at the shrine of Pope Francis. It was such an inspiration to all of us. The approach that Pope Leo XIV will take will be his own approach in the tradition of Francis in terms of ministering to the needs of the poor and respecting migration and what that means to a country and the rest. And we'll just see how he goes forward. But I would hope that the Catholics in America, as you know, there's some division among us, would be receptive to the message of Leo XIV.
Speaking of that, there were times before he was Pope, when he was Cardinal Prevost, he amplified those who took issue with Vice President J.D. Vance's assertion that there is naturally within Christianity generally and Catholicism specifically what he calls a hierarchy of love, meaning it starts closest to your family, it radiates outward, and if you're not a citizen and if you're a migrant, you might understandably, according to the Vice President, receive less love. How do you evaluate the Vice President's orientation to that?
Well, it was interesting to see what His Holiness, before he was His Holiness, said about that. I thought you were going to quote him on that score, that Jesus did not rank people in terms of their worthiness of love. And I do think that people need some guidance in this. Many of us, many Catholics, I don't speak for all of them, that's for sure, but the Gospel of Matthew is our guide. When I was when people go to heaven, they face their Maker. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was homeless, you accommodated me. Everything. When I was in prison, you visited me. The list goes on and on about how we all have a responsibility to each other. And in the Gospel of Matthew, it says, when you did this for the least of my brethren, you did it for me. It also says, when you did not do this for the least of my brethren, you did not do this for me. So let's get back to the gospel as Catholics and the mission of the Catholic Church. I think that the statements that President Trump and all the presidents, Biden, Obama, etc., have made, as well as the Vice President, have been very welcoming so far to Pope Leo XIII.
Couple things happened this week, Speaker Emerita. The Trump administration put out its so-called skinny budget, 23% projected cut in non-defense discretionary spending. You know the appropriations process well. You know where the votes are. Do you think there is any chance at all, even a Republican-led Congress, would go that far?
I certainly would hope not, because this is really, when they talk about making cuts, as you suggested, and they, in order to give tax cuts to the wealthiest people in our country predominantly, it's not right. And I've always said whatever we do inside in our maneuvering is important, but the outside mobilization is most important. And people have to speak up. That they would go to like $800 billion to cut in Medicaid is practically sinful. But people have to speak up, and in order to speak up, they have to know. And that's what we're doing, is to make sure the Republican members of Congress are informed by their constituents about their concern, about what it means for children, what it means for seniors who need long-term care, what it means for our veterans and those with disabilities, for what they need. In order to give a tax cut to the richest people in America. This is a fight. A budget should be a statement of our values, what is important to us as a country should be reflected there, not as a engineered vehicle to give tax cuts to the high end at the expense of those who needed just to be given a chance, and really not using any scale that the Vice President used to say how unworthy people are the further they are away from your family.
Speaking of those at the wealthiest end of the income spectrum, Speaker Emerita Pelosi, on social media this morning, President Trump said he was open to raising taxes on those making above $2.5 million. There's even some indications from the Trump White House they might be open to taxing carried interest, which is a long-running issue, both at the high end of the spectrum. Do you believe that's going to be what happens? Do you believe that's a promise the president intends to pursue?
No, what did he say? He was going to waive giving taxpayers to people making over $2.5 million. Well, that's a pretty high end. That's a pretty high end. But what they say and what they do have been different things. Let's just see where they go. But I'll tell you this. They go down this path with this skinny budget. It's not a skinny budget. It's an emaciated budget if you're middle class in our country, because many of these benefits are middle. They're not even benefits. They're what people put money into themselves over time as they worked, and now they're going to be deprived of that to give a tax cut to the high end. So I don't. They may be feeling the pain. That's why they are. They never feared middle-class people and the rest. But now they may be feeling the pain, and that's why they're making these statements. The most outrageous statement, since you're quoting the president, was yesterday when the press asked him. They said to him, dock workers and truck drivers are losing their jobs because of what's happening at the wharfs, of a product not coming in, because of the threat of tariffs and the rest. And the president said, that's good. They're losing their jobs, and truck drivers and as was referenced, truck drivers and dock workers, because if more goods were coming in and we're losing money on trade, then we're not losing money, even though they're losing their jobs. How could he even be thinking in such a way? It isn't even logical, much less values-based.
Speaking of trade, Speaker Emerita Pelosi, as you well know, this White House name-checks you frequently, saying President Trump is the first, their words, courageous president to take on China, quoting your long advocacy to be more aggressive with China, not just on human rights, but on trade issues. Is the Trump administration, I know they answer this, but I want you to put it in your own words, doing what you long advocated for?
No, I think that we have concerns with China, trade-wise, economically, values-wise, of course, that have a horrible genocide to the Uyghurs in China, oppression of democracy in Hong Kong, elimination of a culture in Tibet. That's that. Economically, not allowing, being fair about our products coming into their market, and security-wise, because they have, over time, transferred technologies that are useful for weapons of mass destruction. So we've had problems in every area with China. And what we could have done is joined with the European Union as the biggest market in the world, negotiated with them. Instead, we taxed, when he was president the first time, we put tariffs on the European Union and missed the opportunity to join together to do something. So, yes, we need to have better policy that is values-based and promotes our commerce into China instead of just allowing them total access to our markets, and again, to make the world a safer place instead of having them sending weapons to Ukraine and understanding how dangerous that is. But there are ways to do it, and I think the president has not done it the best possible, even an effective way. Has not done it in an effective way. But I have had problems with Democratic and Republican presidents in terms of their attitude toward China.
Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Emerita, always a pleasure. Thank you.
But, one more thing.
Sure. Go ahead.
See that he fired the Librarian of Congress.
Carla Hayden, I want to ask you about that.
She is so superb, so excellent, so respected in the library community around the country. She was the librarian at Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore, which I lived at when I was a little girl. But the thing is, my first civic responsibility, I was appointed by Joe Alioto to be a library commissioner, and I took that very seriously. So I understand Carla Hayden and her excellence. This is shameful.
I'm glad you added that. Speaker Pelosi, Speaker Emerita Pelosi, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
So America spends about 17% of its overall economy on health care. 1 in 5 of those dollars spent on health care flows through Medicaid. When we come back, we're going to talk about Republican desires to reduce future spending on Medicaid with the former head of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That's next right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. House and Senate Republicans are trying to move as rapidly as they can through policy and politics, and there's some real complications there, to approve President Trump's budget plan. Potential cuts to future spending on Medicaid have emerged as a key, maybe the most important issue in this negotiating process, done almost entirely within the Republican conferences in the House and Senate. Significantly, this week, House Speaker Mike Johnson appeared to rule out some of the most aggressive options Republicans were considering. But conservatives within his conference still calling for deep cuts. Here with me now, Chiquita Brooks-LaSure. She served as the administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in the Biden administration. Chiquita, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much. I want to play for you sound from Andy Biggs, Republican of Arizona, Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, about the future of Medicaid spending. And I want you to evaluate it on the other side. Let's play that.
There's ways to get to the savings. FMAP is real fundamental reform. What's happening now is you're paying a higher rate of return for able-bodied, working-age people more than you're giving to the vulnerable population of children, pregnant moms, the disabled.
You shouldn't have the able-bodied getting more than the vulnerable. You shouldn't be having people on Medicaid getting more than Medicare. You shouldn't be having the people who should work, can work, getting benefits without working. You shouldn't have the ineligible getting benefits if they're, in fact, ineligible. And you shouldn't have the scam that is being able to be perpetrated by virtue of the provider tax gaming that they do.
So there was one acronym in there. Washington is riddled with acronyms. FMAP, that is Federal Medical Assistance Percentage. That's a percentage states receive. Medicaid is a federal-state partnership. Some states receive more than others. But, Chiquita, just to set that up, clarify, evaluate what you just heard from those two Republican members of the House.
So we heard a couple of things, and one of the criticisms is that states are getting paid different amounts for different people. Medicaid's always been a shared role between the federal government and the states, and states need support from the federal government to cover people. But humans, like people who are covered by the Medicaid program, they're not getting paid. We're not paying them differently if you're low income or working. We pay for services. We pay for the care that people need, and the federal government pays a share of that cost. And let's be clear about who we're talking about when we talk about who we're covering in the Medicaid program. We're talking about some of the lowest income people in this country, most of whom are working, are in school, or are exempted because they have some kind of health condition. That's who's on the Medicaid program, or the middle class, where you have a mom, a dad who's in a nursing home, wants to be at home. You have a kid with developmental disabilities. You have autism. Your kid is born with a very serious disease and they need an organ and transplant, NICUs, children's hospitals. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the Medicaid program.
So the FMAP, the assistance, has a floor of 50%, but some states received up to 77%.
Yes.
There are several states above 65%. I'm going to list off a few of them: Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, Idaho. All Trump states.
That's
all
right.
Very strong Trump states. All 65% or higher. What are the implications of these conversations Republicans are having about reductions in future Medicaid spending for those states?
Well, that's the thing. FMAP is really meant to be how much can your state pay. So FMAP is largely determined by the population and how much money your state has. So some of these conversations, and of course we'll have to see what the numbers look like, could really devastate some of the places.
The upper range is $880 billion over 10 years.
That is going to be devastating to states across the nation.
How about rural hospitals?
rural hospitals in our country are on a knife's edge. They are barely making it. I spent so much of my time talking with rural hospitals who are really struggling. There are so many of them that are closing. There are parts of this country where you now have to drive 2 hours to deliver a baby. That's because they are struggling. And if we want good health outcomes in our country, like Medicaid pays for almost half of all of the births, we need to make sure that people have access to care where they need, and that is certainly in rural America.
What are the other arguments on Capitol Hill among House Republicans in particular who are looking at Medicaid? Even the Wall Street Journal editorial board is that during the Biden administration, which you were there, there was, according to them, excessive or reckless expansion of eligibility and programs provided under Medicaid. And those costs simply must be restrained in the future.
I disagree strongly. I would say a couple of things. First of all, every administration needs to look at waste, fraud, and abuse, and we did too. And we took a lot of steps to make sure that states are spending their dollars well. But expanding eligibility, I would say we have learned from COVID-19 what happens when people are not covered in this country. It hurts all of us. Medicaid is key to our economy. And yes, we did work to make sure that we lower the red tape to get people who are eligible. And again, many of these people are working. You can get Medicaid, and it's wrapping around your employer-sponsored insurance, but sometimes your employer coverage doesn't pay for some of these critical things. Medicaid, for example, covers much more comprehensive coverage for children, and again, for our seniors and people with disabilities.
Chiquita Brooks-LaSure, former head of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Missiles fly between Pakistan and India as the world is holding its breath. I'll speak with the Pakistani ambassador to the United States next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. India and Pakistan and their troops are swapping intense artillery fire in the disputed region of Kashmir. Vice President J.D. Vance says the U.S. should not get involved.
We can't control these countries, though. Fundamentally, India has its gripes with Pakistan. Pakistan has responded to India. What we can do is try to encourage these folks to de-escalate a little bit, but we're not going to get involved in the middle of war that's fundamentally none of our business.
Rizwan Saeed Sheikh joins me now. He is Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, it's good to have you here. Do you agree with the Vice President? The United States should not get involved? And the reason I ask is because as I've covered American presidents, every American president I've covered has been interested in the relationship, especially when it becomes volatile at all between India and Pakistan, and engaged and to help negotiate things in the past.
Thank you, Major, for having me on your show. Yes, you have rightly pointed out that it is a region of geopolitical significance and consequence. So U.S. has been involved each time. The situation has escalated, including the last time when it was in 2019 with regard to Pulwama, and U.S. being a preeminent power has certainly a disproportionate responsibility with regard to not just monitoring but ensuring peace and security, not just at the whole planet, but particularly in regions where it matters. And here we are talking about 1.6 billion people whose lives and livelihoods are being threatened by Indian belligerence that has been taking place for the past 4 nights. They launched provocative aggression against Pakistan 4 nights ago. Pakistan has been exercising its right to self-defense. So far, we downed 5 Indian jets on the first night. It is being termed as the longest dogfight of jets in modern history. And it is going on. The escalation is going on by the Indians. Pakistan has been warning against it. They are doing it on such a flimsy ground of some imaginary terrorist infrastructure that is operating out of Pakistan. It is actually strange and ironical and farcical to a certain extent that India mentions it. It has been playing victimhood for so long. But only last year, the world was talking about extra territorial assassinations that India had conducted, not only in Canada, but here the attempt was foiled in case of United States. There have been other instances in Australia, UK, etc. So it is a country which has this kind of record. You name Samjhauta Express incident, you name Kulbhushan Yadav is the living symbol of Indian terrorist activities. He is a senior Indian Navy officer that Pakistan has in custody as we speak. So how come such a country can point fingers at others? I mean, this is very, very strange.
On that question of pointing fingers, Mr. Ambassador, my colleague Chanel Call spoke with the Indian ambassador on this program yesterday, and I said after that appearance that we would have you on the show to respond, which is what we're going to do. I want you to take a listen and give me your response.
Everybody seems to have a frame of reference in which escalation is a predominant aspect. People keep saying that Pakistan is denying that they ever were behind these. Look, Pakistan has a long history of supporting terrorism.
Your response, Mr. Ambassador.
Pakistan has the longest history of being a victim of terrorism. We have lost 90,000 lives. We were at the front line of global combat against terrorism. That is something which is very well known. I mean, even today, our cities are unsafe. Only last year, we had 1,000+ incidents of terrorism, from terrorists operating from Afghan soil with Indian abetment. But did we launch an attack on India under those circumstances?
Mm-hmm. When the Indian government refers to April 22nd and says that was a provocative and escalatory act, which they blame on terrorists within Pakistan and by extension, the Pakistani government, your response is?
Excuse me. But the fact of the matter is that in any such situation, particularly in a region of geopolitical significance like South Asia, where 1.6 billion lives are at stake, you need more responsible attitude than that. I mean, it's your word against mine situation. Can we do just launch attacks? Can we go and be an aggressor in this situation? I mean, did Pakistan launch an attack on India in case of the Samjhauta Express in 2007? Did Pakistan even launch an attack on India when the Indian Prime Minister himself was in Dhaka in March 2021, chest thumping that we played a role in dismemberment of Pakistan? Is this the kind of rules of engagement that we are setting?
Is there any prospect, Mr. Ambassador, of de-escalating where things currently stand?
Well, Pakistan wants to de-escalate. But the fact of the matter is that escalation has been going on for too long. So how far can we, only exercise self-defense? There have been civilian lives lost over 30, injuries over 70. Pakistan still reserves the right to respond for loss of civilian lives in terms of the Article 51 of the UN Charter. And we will exercise that right, as has been pronounced by the National Security Council of Pakistan, at the time and place of our own choosing.
When the Vice President says this conflict as it exists right now is not the United States' business, do you interpret that at any level, Mr. Ambassador, as a nominally pro-Indian sentiment?
No, I think it's a statement's part which is being selectively quoted. I mean, I have seen the whole statement. It is not restricting itself to saying that we cannot simply play a role. The US President himself has indicated personal availability. He has been pronouncing that if the two countries want it, I am there. I am there are his exact words. And there have been discussions between Secretary Rubio and the Prime Minister of Pakistan. So the efforts are going on, not just by United States, but also by other friendly countries, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc. Saudi Deputy Foreign Minister was in Pakistan earlier this morning. So international community understands the significance of the escalation continuing in a nuclear setting. And it should be avoided at all costs, because the implications are grave, not just for the region, but the politics as well as economy of the planet as a whole.
Indeed. Rizwan Saeed Sheikh, the Pakistani ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more America Decides right here on CBS News 24/7. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. A new book by Michigan's Secretary of State reveals intimate details of how she contended with and was personally traumatized by President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The book is called The Purposeful Warrior, Standing Up for What's Right When the Stakes Are High. Jocelyn Benson joins me now. In addition to being Michigan Secretary of State, she is also importantly running to become its next governor. Madam Secretary, good to see you. You know as well as I do that when a political figure of any stripe writes a book and is running for another office, a sometimes cynical public assumes you're writing it as a campaign manifesto. Did you?
No, I actually started writing this long before I had thought of running for governor, but in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election. It was an effort to tell the story of what it was like to stand up to a president, what it took. And it ultimately evolved into a call to action for all of us in this moment or in any other turbulent moment to find our courage and use our voices to stand up to powerful individuals on behalf of ourselves, our communities, the people we love, and the places we call home.
Let me read from the book, and we have a quote that I'll share with our viewers on the screen. Quote, "I stood up to Donald Trump when he lied about me, just as any one of us should be prepared to do with any president or any leader who uses their authority to belittle others with lies and threats. Pushing back on his lies was grueling, exhausting, demoralizing, and discouraging. Yet in refusing to allow the lies to stand, I found that my small voice could match his power." Explain what you mean by grueling, exhausting, demoralizing, and discouraging.
It's really difficult, even when the truth is on your side and the voices and votes of millions of Michiganders who I was defending and protecting that election result. It's grueling when you have to stand up in defense of those realities to the most powerful leader in the free world who is unafraid to use every tool in his toolbox to make you afraid to speak out, to make you regret speaking out, to make you feel that your voice is small and doesn't matter. And the toll that that takes, because it's not just one time, this was over the course of an entire year speaking out, both before, during, and after the election. It's exhausting, not just for me, but for our entire team. That doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you acknowledge the challenge and the struggle so that as other people try to determine their path to stand up to any type of powerful figure, they recognize that it will be tough, but it's still the right thing to do.
In that process of standing up, I want you to imagine a hypothetical, which I bet you've already imagined. Let's say you win and become governor, and you have an issue with President Trump, and you resolve it. Do you appear with him in public, even though you might invite criticism, as your current governor, Gretchen Whitmer, already has?
It's unlikely. I mean, I would say, based on my actions as Secretary of State, my commitment is always going to be, as governor, to protect the economic strength and prosperity of the people of Michigan, just as I've protected their voices and their votes and their freedoms. And so I will work with anyone who in a good faith effort was going to speak the truth and help us achieve those goals. But I've seen nothing from this administration that would indicate that we're aligned in that regard. My commitment is to improving the cost of living in our state, and everything Donald Trump has done with his reckless economic policies has only made lives more challenging and increased costs in our state. So it's going to be more important that I, as governor, be prepared to stand up to anyone who would harm our residents, and that'll be my commitment, just as I believe that it is the responsibility of anyone in an executive position in this moment.
A Michigan Legislative Committee has subpoenaed you for various materials about election training. Will you comply? And if not, why not?
Yeah, we have complied with a great deal of their requests. We actually have put also everything we've given, the thousands of documents, education materials, online at michigan.gov/election transparency. What they also want us to give up and what they've subpoenaed are materials that would make it possible for people to impersonate clerks or tamper with election machines. And as the chief election officer for the state of Michigan, I cannot compromise the security of our systems. And so we'll see how this plays out. And I welcome the involvement of the courts to help make clear we've got to protect the security of our elections while being transparent. But we've been abundantly open in providing them with thousands of documents they've requested. And the entire public can see those same documents online at michigan.gov/election transparency.
There's also a campaign finance website that you re-engineered. Critics say it is less efficient, less useful than it used to be. You've said you're upset about that. When's it going to be fixed?
We're working. I was actually on the phone with the CEO of the company today that we hired to upgrade our campaign finance reporting system. I'm confident and optimistic as we get through this upgrade, which is a temporary challenge, that the long-standing campaign finance reports will be accessible and more transparent than before, and that's what we're all working towards together. And I'm impatient as everyone else. I want to get there too. This is the process of modernizing a very antiquated system.
Michigan Democratic Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Madam Secretary, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
The new head of FEMA making waves during his first day on the job. His message to employees who might be tempted to, in any way, shape, or form, resist the Trump agenda. That's next. You're watching America Decides. This is America Decides. You're with us. I'm thankful for that. The new acting head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency has what he considers a stark warning for those he says maybe 20% of the FEMA staffers who might look to resist the change he intends to bring.
You can ask anybody that those 20% of the people are a problem. And they have to be sidelined. So don't get in my way.
I want to bring in our Homeland Security correspondent, Nicole Skanga. Nicole, who is this person, and what did that warning mean to the FEMA employees gathered there and online, I presume, who heard it?
Yeah, David Richardson is a former Marine corporal. He has never served in a disaster management capacity throughout his career. He did formerly serve as the Assistant Secretary for the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office within DHS. But this was a speech on day one that was broadcast to thousands of FEMA staffers, not just in Washington, D.C. headquarters, but also tuning in remotely. Current FEMA staff members described it to me as terrifying, unhinged, and threatening. He said, "I and I alone speak for FEMA." He warned any of his dissenters to get out of his way. Take a listen at this.
If you're one of those 20% of the people and you think those tactics and techniques are going to help you, they will not, because I will run right over you.
Now, he is the senior official performing the duties of the FEMA administrator, but he said during that meeting that he doesn't make much of his title. He has all the authority he needs from the President of the United States. Of course, congressional lawmakers, I imagine, will take some issue with that as this administration tries to take steps to possibly eliminate FEMA, knowing that it was a congressionally mandated and
Nicole, quickly remind the audience why he's even there.
He's there because just yesterday, Cameron Hamilton, who was the former acting administrator of FEMA, was fired quite unceremoniously by the DHS Deputy Secretary and one of the senior advisors, Corey Lewandowski, after publicly testifying on the Hill Major that it was not his recommendation to the President of the United States to eliminate the disaster relief agency. And current staffers told me, although Cameron Hamilton came in singing the tune of the administration, he visited some of these disaster zones in Kentucky and North Carolina. He learned the value of FEMA, the work that they were doing on the ground. He had a change of heart, and he knew going into that congressional testimony that had he publicly opposed the administration's plan to eliminate FEMA, his job was at risk. I don't think that's at risk here. I mean, this acting head of FEMA, David Richardson, has made it very clear that his desire is to execute the president's plan for FEMA.
Nicole Skanga, thank you very, very much.
Thank
I appreciate it. That does it for today. I will be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report is coming up next, right here on CBS News 24/7.